Hi, I'm Craig Wood. Thanks for viewing this presentation on revisiting and renewing Peggy McIntosh's Invisible Knapsack. I begin this presentation by acknowledging I'm a non-Indigenous man, born on these lands, the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. Until recently, I didn't know the name of the Kaurna people. Their names and histories, stories, cultures and languages were omitted from my white neo-colonial education, which formally began just down that path. Mine was a white education, and it reified the neo-colonial history of South Australia that I was told began here at the old gum tree with Governor Hindmarsh's proclamation on 28 December 1836. Today, I live and work and write on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging of these First Nations. I acknowledge the work of Professor Lester Irabina-Rigney, a descendant of the Narungga, Kaurna and Ngurindjeri peoples, and his work calls to my non-Indigenous body. Rigney writes, "The struggle against racism is not solely the fight against racist lunatics on the fringe. The struggle must also include the fight to deracialize micro and macro social formations left to us by colonization, which continue to affect and shape the lives of his people." As a non-Indigenous white man, I'm also drawn to the work of Aileen Moreton-Robinson, Robin DiAngelo, Peggy McIntosh and others who have contributed to the field of critical whiteness studies. In her often-cited work, White Privilege, Unpacking the Knapsack, Peggy McIntosh identifies 26 conditions that attach privilege to skin pigmentation, benefiting white people, including education, financial services, healthcare, language, law and order, and professional life. In this presentation, I revisit and renew McIntosh's Invisible Knapsack, and I add recognition of white possessive logics, in which Aileen Moreton-Robinson identifies white privilege as predicated on retaining the benefits of colonial theft on the one hand, while exalting a sense of tolerance and fair play on the other. This is not a confessional tale, but I recognise the times and places in which I have contributed to Indigenous dispossession and the transgenerational failings of colonisers to see, to hear, to experience, to respect and love the richness and diversity of the world's oldest continuing cultures on these lands we now call Australia. In part, this presentation is a response to Pierre W. Aurelius's piercing words about people who benefit from whiteness. Aurelius states, "Someone with a heart, who is endowed with human compassion and respect for his or her fellow human beings, should not tolerate the injustice inflicted on people who happen to be from different races, ethnicities, and cultures." I recognise that my endowment of human compassion sits inside a frame of multiple and intersecting layers of privilege, and that complicates my claim I'm undertaking resistance work which aims to end domination and deracialise social formations. I expect my claims will be received with suspicion because I'm often dressed by hegemony. I wear the cap and gown of privilege of the academy. In truth, there are days when I have been sitting in meetings or preparing this presentation or sitting still and listening to my thoughts when I've doubted myself. I've wondered about white experiences that I have shared with racist lunatics on the fringe and which cannot be erased. I also know that racist lunatics who are similarly dressed by hegemony and who look like me and sound like me will reject the claims that I make about domination and whiteness. These lunatics and others will be hostile to my showing, labelling and pulling privilege apart. More concerning than outright hostility of those people who look and sound like me is that I know I remain susceptible to the surreptitiousness of their dominance, which can manifest as whiteness. These dominant forces are forever shifting and reinscribing themselves, working to strengthen their barriers which box in and snuff out resistance to their domination. I know that me and my privileged body have a propensity for clumsiness, especially when the white national imaginary unsinks my otherwise paired head, heart and hands from doing their work of pulling apart structures of domination, and when my learned micro and macro social formations reclaim power in the retina of my eyes and the ossicles of my ears, when they conspire in my larynx to implant hurt and division in my words which my lungs give breath to as they cross the threshold of my lips, and when my neck turns my head, or my legs turn my body away from bearing witness to racist domination. I am recognizing my tangible and intangible stores of cultural capital. They have yielded me individual benefits since before I was born, and which function like Peggy McIntosh's list of qualities in her invisible knapsack. In this revised and renewed invisible knapsack of privilege, I know that I have my own intersecting layers of privilege, because I can bear witness to racism and choose to be a bystander without it affecting me. I can withdraw from struggles to end domination without personal cost. It can be as simple as scrolling past stories of suffering in a social media news feed, or skipping ahead to the next chapter of a book, or closing the book altogether. I can wear the mask of a scholar from positivist traditions just as easily as a critical scholar's mask. I can aspire to be average and still be rewarded under the illusion of merit, an illusion which is blind to socio-political sleight of hand. I can flick a switch to access power. I can attach a cable and charge my laptop. I can tap or swipe my phone and interact with people from almost anywhere on the planet. Or I can access their contribution to knowledge in their performances and writings. People who look like me and sound like me have a history of doing that. I can post critical policy analyses of my government and other institutions to social media without fear of persecution, loss of employment, or imprisonment. When I enter a room, I'm able to choose to be either small and silent or loud and large, but not be judged on account of my race, ethnicity, faith, gender identity, or physical ability. I can make statements without experiencing the pressure of others assuming that I speak on behalf of my race, ethnicity, faith, gender identity, or physical ability. I enjoy the benefits of healthcare and tertiary education. Both have been sites of pain and struggle, but both have contributed to my economic power, which in turn is sufficient to continue funding my health and education. I continue to accrue economic power that has funded my postgraduate studies as well as my domestic and international travel to conferences, and in years to come it will adequately fund my retirement. When I have applied to rent property or access finance to purchase property, I've not been subject to racial profiling. My claims to property ownership are recognised by the colonizers' laws. I sleep safely with a roof over my head, which has always been the case. I've never wanted for food. Those in positions of power trusted my parents to provide for and meet my needs, rather than remove me from community. I can cite examples of challenging times in my ancestral history, but I do not carry intergenerational trauma. I've been free from violence and war. When I walk through my neighbourhood, I don't feel the need to check over my shoulder. I shop without being followed by security. I've never been arrested or even bothered by law enforcement. Well, one time a police officer issued me with a speeding ticket, and when the officer directed me to pull my car over to the side of the road, I experienced contrition rather than fear. Taxis do not drive off without me. I can board public transport and sit at the front or the back without feeling danger. I can travel through an airport and board a plane without being racially profiled. And when I drive my car, it's not racism that underpins the abuse from other drivers. I'm able to travel throughout the world with very few visa restrictions. I have a birth certificate, citizenship status, and I can participate in elections. If I need help, I can ask for it without being judged, patronised, or humiliated, and if need be, I can pay for the assistance. I can wear whatever clothes I choose to without fear of being harmed, humiliated, or exotified. I only need to know one language. It's the language I'm speaking. It's the language that you are reading. It's the language of the colonizers. When I hear my name pronounced by people in positions of power, they do not stumble and give up, nor snicker to cover up their own inadequacy, nor look accusingly at me for revealing their inadequacy. In fact, my name is always accurately pronounced by people in positions of power, and that helps to confirm I am one of them. People who look and sound like me are the majority of elected public officials in my community. When I sit in meetings, people who look and sound like me are the majority, and we're usually in positions of power. It was the same for me at school and at university. The stories that are performed in mainstream media are stories that I relate to. It was the same for me with curriculum materials that we studied at school and university. I look and sound like the Western Judeo-Christian people who, I'm told through dominant narratives in media and school curriculum, built the economic and democratic institutions of which I enjoy the benefits. The storytellers of dominant narratives assure me I bear no responsibility for genocide and dispossession that underpins the development of economic and democratic institutions, which is reported by some storytellers from minority groups who posit alternative histories. I fondly recall access as a child to books, newspapers, magazines and other literature, which told stories I could relate to. I was introduced to publicly funded libraries and I was able to access them throughout my schooling, university studies and other writing projects. I recall my Western schooling and university education being valued and celebrated. I was told by enough people who looked and sounded like me that I could do whatever I set my mind to, and I believed them. I move through time and space in a body that is white, male, able, and heterosexual. Unless I make a deliberate choice to break the rules, society considers my way of being, including my diet, words, and actions, to be dignified and polite. I can wear my layers of privilege like a tailor-made suit and progress through social hierarchies. I recognise this list is not exhaustive. Like McIntosh, as I revisit and renew the invisible knapsack of white privilege, I recognise barriers to disrupting taken-for-granted white assumptions. McIntosh reflexively writes, "The pressure to avoid these assumptions is great, for in facing them, I must give up the myth of meritocracy." I also know that my multiple and intersecting layers of privilege make me vulnerable to the clandestine nature of the oppressor's monologues which can usurp my criticality. I know that I have to continue to critically struggle against the white national imaginary and dominance to be hope. I know that I need to constantly revisit and redo critical self-study. I've not stopped worrying if I'm Albert Memmi's colonizer who refuses or the colonizer who accepts. But I am reminded of Albert Memmi's observation. One cannot change one's past, but one can re-remember it. And I know that the process of unmasking whiteness, of unpacking the invisible knapsack, is my work to do. It's necessary and urgent work to do. Thank you for choosing to view this session.